So next we have Alex from the Greens.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here for this incredibly important cause, which is really about the future of Australia, because it's the kids who are the future. I want to talk to you today about delusion and the impact it is having on a significant proportion of children and parents in Australia today, because I believe that actually delusion, a false impression of reality, is the key driver of poverty, in which over 600,000 kids in Australian families find themselves in today. It's a delusion unfortunately shared by both the Liberal and Labor parties, as well as by many policymakers and bureaucrats across government. This inability to grasp the realities facing ordinary Australian families has led to one of the more reprehensible policy decisions in Australia's recent history this year. It's a decision which instantly moved more than 65,000 families around Australia into poverty, instantly, overnight. And poverty is just one of the aspects that are problematic with this decision. On the New Start allowance, with its punitive activity testing and reporting regimes, sole parents are expected to try and find work in a labour market where the workforce is over 50% casualised, and where shift work and irregular hours are the norm for entry-level employees. How do you find care for your child when you have to work a night shift at short notice, when you get rung up that afternoon and told to come into work? And for plenty of us, finding childcare at all is an enormous challenge in itself, with waiting lists of 3 to 4 years the norm in many places across Australia. In 2010, as the Rudd government was looking at introducing this last of Howard's recommended welfare reforms, so-called reforms, I read a report analysing the barriers that single parents face when trying to enter the workforce. And the study focused on mental health, drug and alcohol addiction, lack of education, and the incidence of physical disabilities and illness amongst single parents. But not once did it touch on the realities of the labour market that these people are trying to enter, and not once did it mention childcare. The reality is that single parents face real barriers to work, barriers of a structural kind which have nothing to do with their personal deficiencies, as the government thinks. These barriers are things that they have no control over. The reality is that actually regular work with regular consistent pay of the kind that supports a family is actually increasingly rare in this country. Another delusion is the regime of activity testing. Its premise that single parents aren't already substantially engaged in community service and caring activities and work is actually farcical. Probably the greatest delusion of all is that a family might be able to live on less than $450 a week, or $538 in the case of a three-child family. And that somehow it's okay for single-parent families to try and scrape by on incomes of more than $100 a week below the poverty line. And this is in a country with an annual GDP of $1.65 trillion. And then there's the fundamental reality, which somehow escapes our two major parties and government bureaucrats, that children, being children, need care. In 1973, when Bill Hayden introduced the Supporting Mothers Benefit, there was a recognition of this basic fact. The so-called reforms and restructuring of our welfare system are failing to get more single parents into the workforce, and that's a fact. What they are doing is making life much more difficult for single parents, as Bianca and Kerry have shown us today, and told us within their own families. They are directly conflicting with single parents' responsibilities to care for their children. Because the fact is that it's children who are suffering from the reality gap of the major parties. I wanted to end today by reading you a bit of writing from Elspeth McGuinness, who was the convener of the Single Mothers and Their Child Association, organisation, who are here today. And she wrote this in 2001, which is well before the most punitive lot of changes to our welfare system were introduced by John Howard. So in 2001, Elspeth wrote, and I quote, "To return to the kitchen sink, my children are not interested in welfare reform, but they are acutely aware of competing demands on their mother's time. The trade-offs between compulsory paid work activities and the obligations of care presuppose a carefree child. No longer requiring access to parental care, the carefree child rises, eats and attends school by itself, travels home alone, completes its homework and after-school commitments, prepares meals, cleans, washes up, tells itself about its day and puts itself to bed with a hug and a kiss. The carefree child knows the parent would be there if they could be and knows it is important and valued and alone. That's the reality that the delusions of our two major parties are forcing on single-parent families and children around Australia today. The Greens are absolutely committed to turning this reality into a happier one. We want to restore payments to single-parent families so you can get on with the work of caring for your children, the most important thing of all. Thank you.